CBS News political reporter Adam Brewster joins us now from Asbury Park, New Jersey. Adam, we're hearing about technical issues at some of the polling locations, and there was maybe something proper for a court. What can you tell us?
So this was some issues with the electronic polling books major at various voting sites around the state earlier today. That led to some long lines or delays opening, and some voters reported having issues being able to cast their ballot at that point. The ACLU, the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, later tonight at about 6 o'clock or so, 5:30, asked a court to extend the polling hours in New Jersey for 90 minutes across the state at all polling sites until 9:30 p.m. Eastern. A judge heard arguments in the case and just a short time ago denied that request. He said some of the evidence was based on hearsay. There were many opportunities for these people to vote, and he couldn't find evidence that was presented to him that was clear and convincing that anyone had been disenfranchised by these issues with electronic poll books. He noted that these were used during during early voting, People had time during early voting to cast their ballots and had other measures of relief. And if this happened early in the morning, had time later in the day to go back to a polling site. So the polls closed at 8 p.m. as planned in New Jersey. Of course, anyone who is in line is able to still stay in line and cast their ballot as long as they were in line by 8 p.m.
All right, well, Governor Phil Murphy is trying to become the first Democratic incumbent to win re-election since 1977. Why hasn't an incumbent Democrat won in so long, and how are things looking this year?
Well, part of that is, Elaine, the fact that New Jersey holds its elections in these off years. When New Jersey changed its constitution to hold the governor's elections in these off years following the presidential cycle, the then governor at the time said he wanted the issues to be focused on state-based issues in New Jersey rather than the federal mood. Now, there's some who say that this was a bit cynical in an attempt to, prevent another FDR-type figure, that's the era we're talking about, from emerging and sort of taking over the national mood of things and impacting the race. But you've seen when Democrats have won the White House in 1992, Christine Todd Whitman was elected a Republican governor. When Barack Obama won in 2008, Chris Christie became governor for 8 years, and Republicans, as those two specifically, Christine Todd Whitman and Chris Christie, were both reelected. Democrats outnumber Republicans by about 1 million voters in New Jersey, but there are still 2.5 million independent voters. The Ciattarelli campaign, Jack Ciattarelli, Phil Murphy's opponent, has said that that's who he's been targeting. That's why he's been focusing his message on economics, on sort of the affordability of the state, trying to win over enough of those voters to overcome some of the mathematical disadvantage that comes from being a Republican in New Jersey.
Adam, I want to ask you, you're deeply sourced and you spend a lot of time looking at voting access, voting issues at the state level. And I want to go back to what we just talked about, this court challenge, the ACLU, and how the judge looked at it. And I wonder if you think that that's going to be something we're going to see more of. That is to say, any day of disruptions or even modest disruptions will be weighed against other access to voting before Election Day itself. And as states become more open to and more comfortable with using early voting and other means, these day of disruptions may prove they can be less litigated and less potent maybe in terms of voter access and how the judiciary will weigh in on them. I'm just curious your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Major, right? There's, in New Jersey, there's mail voting. There's now 9 days of early voting. That's something that Governor Murphy signed into law earlier this year. So that was a new thing for people to use in New Jersey. Mail voting was much more popular than the early in-person voting. We'll see if that changes over time. But the judge, looked at a couple of things. One, saying people had more than just today to cast their ballot. That was sort of part of his thinking here, or that these were issues that happened at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, with polls open another 12, 13, 14 hours, time for people to come back, or there are other measures of relief to get a messenger to bring you an absentee ballot, for example, or to cast a provisional ballot or an emergency ballot, and that the evidence that was presented in this specific case was largely based on hearsay. I heard from someone who heard from someone, and that's something that, judges are usually quick to knock down in court. So I think it will be interesting to see how these things weigh. Certainly, if there are massive delays or massive issues at polling places, judges will still consider granting relief where that is warranted. If that happens late in the day, or if there are credible reports of, multiple people, it doesn't even have to be dozens or hundreds of people, who turned away and said they could not vote, and they, gave sworn affidavits to that effect, that may take in. But certainly, the more access that people have before voting before Election Day, this is just a reminder to people to say, hey, you don't have to wait until Election Day. The judge also said this is a live event, right? You're going to wait in line sometimes because voters take a long time to cast their ballot. There's some just generally things that can go wrong when you wait until the last minute to do something. So it's, I also wonder if moments like this will further push people towards casting their votes for Election Day, whether that be by mail or whether that be going early in person to do so.
Yeah, I know it was like tens of millions of dollars, right, Adam, for the early voting in New Jersey that was spent on that. So we'll see how that continues to play out. Finally, Adam, we've seen the influences of President Biden and former President Trump play out in other places. What about in New Jersey? How have we seen that play out in that contest?
Certainly a role, and it kind of looms over this. Now, former President Trump did not endorse Jack Ciattarelli in this campaign. Major, as you know, the former president often endorses candidates that he feels good about, and this is going to be a hard race for Jack Ciattarelli to win. But certainly Phil Murphy tried to tie Jack Ciattarelli to former President Trump. Now, whether voters bought that or not, I spoke to one voter after a Ciattarelli event last week who did not vote for the former president in the November 2020 election and said he didn't buy these ties that the Murphy campaign was trying to make to Jack Ciattarelli and Donald Trump. That being said, President Biden, his popularity has dropped here in New Jersey. He's 6 points underwater in a state that he won by 16 points. If this race is close, even if Phil Murphy wins, there's going to be a lot of Democrats in other states looking at that, wondering what effect President Biden will have on their races in the coming year. That all comes with the caveat that this race and Virginia appeared to be, solidly trending toward the Democrats as recently as August, and things turned on a dime. We don't know what the, political climate will look like a year from now, but certainly it's hard to separate national politics from state-level politics entirely in this hyper-partisan era. The former president and the current president likely weighed in on some voters' decisions.
All right, Adam Brewster reporting from Asbury Park, New Jersey. Adam, thank you so much.